Welcome to Find Me the Money. Today's guest is Phil Segal of Charles Griffin Intelligence, and we are talking about using a private investigator in your divorce. Phil opened Charles Griffin Intelligence in 2009, specializing in complex financial investigations. He's actually been working as an investigator since 2006, but before that, he's got a really interesting background. He worked for 19 years as a journalist in India and Pakistan and ran NBC's Mexico City Bureau. He covered Parliament in Canada and then became a finance specialist in Asia, lastly being the finance editor at the Asian Wall Street Journal. Phil won a fellowship at Yale Law School and then graduated with a JD from Cardozo. He was admitted to practice law in New York in 2007 and maintains his law license there. Segal was an adjunct law professor in fact investigation at Cardozo Law School for 3 years and has spoken to bar associations all over the country on the topics of asset searching, ethics, and general investigation. He's the author of a book, The Art of Fact Investigation, Creative Thinking in the Age of Information Overload, and has written more than a dozen articles for law journals and other legal publications on how to investigate ethically. Welcome to the podcast, Phil.
Nice to be here, Tracy.
It is always fun to talk to you. I've got to tell our audience we've done numerous presentations together, both in person and on Zoom. We've done cases together, investigating together. And so this is going to be an awesome conversation. But I don't want to save this until the end. Where will people find you after our interview?
We have a website, charlesgriffinllc.com. And if you can't remember that, you just Google Philip Segal and investigations, and it should come up. We
and
also
of course,
have blogs, and you can look at those too. And those are reachable via the website or directly at thedivorceasshunter.com and theethicalinvestigator.com.
And we'll put it all in the show notes, so everyone is for sure going to get that as well. So getting right into talking about money and divorce and investigations, people come to me all the time saying, do I need a private investigator? And so that's a great topic for us to cover because people who are getting divorced recognize that they need help finding assets and finding monies. They're saying, I need to find bank accounts, real estate, business interests. Phil, who do they hire for that?
They can hire an investigator, they can hire a forensic accountant, or they can hire both. What I do that I think forensic accountants often don't do is I look up from the four corners of all the documents that you have produced to you or that you might have in the house. And I say, what else might there be? He has these two companies in Wisconsin, let's say, but look, there are 3 other companies that we found in Wisconsin. How do those relate to these two, or are they completely separate? He has a condo in Las Vegas. He has an old car. He has something else, and we then build a picture of what he may have, and also sometimes looking at what the business does and how it's licensed and who it deals with, how big it may be, because sometimes women, especially, who stay home with children, maybe don't know how big the business is. They don't look at the numbers, and we can sometimes figure out from certain indicators this is a big business. It has an entire warehouse in downtown Los Angeles. It employs more than 40 people, according to a lawsuit that someone brought against it. So that's something that you can say no. When the husband says it's a small business, it doesn't have any money, you say, come on, you have a whole block. Your property tax nut is this. And so you can build with some imagination some good questions to ask in discovery. And so that's what investigators can do. But what I can't do is what you do, look at all the bank account information and all the books and records and figure out if there's a hole. That I'm not going to do. And I never testify as an expert because everything I find is a matter of public record. And so I don't say, in my opinion, this is his company. Here it is. This is his company. Here is the public record that says it is. And then the lawyer goes ahead, if it's in a divorce context, to subpoena any records that they may need, including bank records.
I always tell people who are asking me, do I need a forensic accountant or a private investigator? I say things like, if you have a lot of financial documents and you need someone to dig through those and figure out where the money went, that's what I do. if you're doing something that I term the wild goose chase, is there real estate out there? Are there business interests? Who is he doing business with? Things like that. That is for the private investigator. Do you think I'm accurate in that kind of
Yeah,
description?
that's very accurate. And what happens a lot of times, and this I did a case this summer with a divorce lawyer here in the New York area, and they had discovery and they had a forensic accountant on the case, and they suspected that a couple of vendors were invented, but they couldn't prove it. They said, "Well, here's an invoice to some. It was a ski house in Maine. Is that really a company that sells widgets from China?" And so I figured out that that was the ski house of some associate of the other side in the divorce. And indeed, this was a made up company. Well, there wasn't a company like that in Maine, but I found it in Delaware. And so they were able to then go and subpoena the documents in Delaware. But the address in Maine was just to throw people off the scent. There was nothing to go serve in Maine. No, it wasn't incorporated in Maine, but it was in Delaware, and it turned out they weren't even that careful. The Delaware documents did have this person associate as the incorporator. Plus, I found an extra company with a slightly different name in Delaware, also with the same guy. So we got two for the price of one. And so that was something that came out of working with a forensic accountant and with me. And then when they get more documents from those extra companies, I find they give those to the forensic accountant to go over. So it's not just one or the other. Sometimes it's working together, back and forth.
That case is a really great example of working together as a forensic accountant and a private investigator. That you can take data I've found and dig into it, or I can take pieces of information that you've found and see, is there anything in the financial documents that matches up to that or gives us more insight?
That's right. That's right. So when people say which one should I hire, as you say, sometimes if you think you have all the information you're going to need, start with a forensic accountant. If you don't think there's a lot of information that you're getting, if you think they're holding back, it can be what money well spent to invest $3,000, let's say, to have me take a look at what there is. And oftentimes in that $3,000, you find things.
For
And after
sure.
all, if I find more than $3,000, it's worth it.
Of
And that
course.
is what I tell people. And usually you do find something. But the other day I found a woman had a pretty good idea of what her husband had. They had 7 homes, and she was right on all 7. Those addresses all checked out. She said the kids told me there might be a boat slip that he bought. Well, I found the boat slip, $45,000 boat slip. So that paid my fee. But in addition, I gave her some information about public filings that her husband's private company had made, which gave us a pretty good indication of how big a company it was and how much money it made. And I don't think they had that before. So it was, I think, for that woman, it was money well spent.
That's awesome. There are a lot of private investigators out there. And I know that people are often wondering, how do I know if I found a good one? They're just sometimes Googling to find someone, or, someone might say, oh, I know a guy, but they've never used them. How would someone know if they're talking to a private investigator who really has good skills?
Well, the first thing you can ask is if you don't have discovery yet, if you haven't sued yet, if you say, "Can you get me bank account information?" and they say, "Sure," run the other way, because that's not allowed. And judge, you get the wrong judge there. Some judges may not care. Some will say, "How did you get this bank account information?" And if you didn't have the right to get it, you could be in some trouble. So I would say that's one question. And some investigators will go and get bank accounts for you the way, I don't know. I mean, I always say to people, if your investigator last year got you bank accounts, why are you coming to me? And if your
Right?
investigator last year got you cocaine, happens to be illegal. It's against federal law, and in New York, certainly New York State banking law. The other thing is, sometimes you can say to them, this is all online, right? Like, you don't have to actually go anywhere. You could do all this from your desk over the web, right? And if they say, yeah, sure, that's also not good, because most places in the United States require you to go to the courthouse to get documents. And you need to be checking litigation involving your person, because that's sometimes the best way to figure out if someone has a company that you didn't know about. If he's sued personally because his company reneged on a debt and he gave a personal guarantee for that company's debt, they will sue that company and him personally. So by looking at what he has had to defend, you might see a company you didn't know about or 10 companies you didn't know about, because people are lazy and they name things Alpha 1, Alpha 2, Alpha 3. It's hard to come up with brand new names. So people tend to name in patterns. They name after operas. They name after streets in the neighborhood where they grew up. And I've found companies that way. Okay, he likes these. They name after summer camps they went to, that kind of thing. So, so you ask them, do you need to go outside your office? And if they say no, we do everything online, I wouldn't also hire that person. You may ask them. You may ask them about finances. Can you know how much about finance? Are you comfortable with accounts, with balance sheets, that kind of securities filings? Like, can maybe ask them what's a Form D? And if they don't know what a Form D is, go away, because a Form D is a private placement, and you often see someone's name on that. That's when the private company that they bought into is about to go public, and they're going to sell their shares. And that might be the only place they appear in SEC filings. And you got to check those. And so those are three good questions. I did do an article on my website. You can see it for the ABA. It was 5 things to ask a private investigator if you want to hire them, and 5 tips on doing it yourself if you can't afford a private investigator. So you can get that on the website, I believe.
And the ABA, for our listeners, is the American Bar Association. So those would be great resources. So are you saying that you can't just sit at your desk and use Google? I mean, your job is just searching Google, right?
No, that's not right. Google is an indispensable tool, but it's only one tool. It's like using only Google is like building a house with a hammer. You're going to need a hammer at some point when building a house, but you'll also need lots of other tools. Most public information is not on Google. Court records are not on Google. You have to search the individual court records. If even for jurisdictions that are all online, you won't do it on Google. You have to go to the site of the Miami-Dade courthouse, for example. And even there, sometimes if it's family law, things are redacted and you have to go and get them in person. In New Hampshire, you can't even go look yourself. You have to send someone to ask the clerk to do the search and then wait a week or two for them to do that. That can't be done from your desk. So definitely, there are all kinds of public information on securities filings. That's not something that's on Google. Old newspaper clippings. Some are on Google, many aren't. You need a database for that, or 2. You need social media, which doesn't all come up on Google. Don't forget, Google's a business. Google gives you the results that will help make Google money. Google is not neutral. And, you should certainly look at Google always. And I always like to look at another browser or 2, because sometimes you get very different results on DuckDuckGo or Bing even.
Mm-hmm.
So it's good. Don't be a prisoner of Google. We don't need to be. It's so easy to use 2 or 3. And then it's knitting all these things together, making sense of them. That's the artistry of it.
I know you like to say that there is one quality that a good investigator must have. What is that quality?
I think it's imaginativeness. It's what should I be seeing that I'm not seeing? What doesn't make sense in this picture? And remember the Madoff case. A lot of people didn't catch that this was a scam, but some did, because they said any fund this big would not have a 2-man auditing firm in a shopping mall
Right.
outside New York City. So there's all kinds of things. When someone says, I'm a top flight wealth advisor, and here's my office, I always like to look at a map. Where is that in that city? And if that's a city where the houses are, sell for $23,000 each, and every lot is burned out, well, then that's not a real high quality wealth advisor, chances are. So you have to see, if I say, You seem like a big wealth advisor. I want to see indicators that that's true. So you have to put yourself in the shoes of the person you're looking at and say, does this make sense? Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't.
I think I say the same thing about forensic accountants, that one of the most critical skills is, or not a skill, but you need investigative intuition. And I think it's very similar to your imaginativeness, because I can't teach someone to have investigative intuition, but they need to have that gut feel when something isn't right. I've done cases before where I've gone to my client after looking through a bunch of financial records, and I've said, here's a list of 20 transactions. Can you tell me something about these transactions? And their face goes white, all the blood drains from it. And for whatever reason, they know that this is part of some sort of theft scheme. And they say to me, why did you pull out these 20 transactions? And I'll say, there was something that didn't sit right about them compared to the other transactions. And I didn't know what that was. So I wanted to ask you. You can't teach that to someone.
No, definitely not. And I've trained great investigators who, listening over my shoulder, I'm taking in a case and I get off the phone and they've already started the investigation behind me. And they've said, here, she lives here. This is what she does, just from my side of the conversation. And I've had other investigators who say, well, what am I supposed to do with these 50 SEC filings? What am I supposed to? And I said, well, you read them and you find bad things that the person might have done,
What kind of bad things, Phil?
Well, things like, okay, he was the CFO of this corporation and he left in 2010. But then you notice that in 2015, that corporation was sued by the SEC and in a securities class action for things that went on in 2007, and he wasn't named. Yet he was in charge at the time. So just because they didn't name him doesn't mean he doesn't have some responsibility for having this mess up happen. And is he going to be a good CFO now? Well, look what happened when he was on, even though he wasn't named, it happened on his watch. So that's the kind of thing you could say, no, I didn't find any litigation with him. Yes, but that's accompanied by reading the papers and just looking around. You think that's a company that was in big trouble earlier. When did he get there? Some people leave just in time before, and then they leave things to blow up right after they go. And even if they're not sued, they have to bear some responsibility if they're the CFO of a gigantic place.
Love that example. You are so good at this. So there are endless sources of information, really. How do you know, where do you start looking for information, Phil, when you come into a case?
I have some databases that give basic address information, phone information, sometimes some company affiliation information, and they're incomplete. And then I go down and I try and turn over every piece of public information I can about a person. So in the jurisdictions where he's lived and worked, let's say for the last 10 or 15 years, court cases. And I want court cases involving him and all the companies I know. And then I want to find out, are there securities records, regulatory filings, licensing, social media, news articles. One really great source is in these news databases. People, before they get in trouble, like to boast about what they do. And they put out these news releases on Business Newswire, and then when things go bad, they take those down off their website. But Bloomberg and other places have those forever. Those don't go away. So if you say, the business would never amounted to much, I can say, that's interesting because in 2017, you alleged in this news release that you were a top 10 corporation in this field. How could that be? Well, you might have taken it off your website, but here it is. And you wrote this. This isn't an article that needs correcting. You wrote this. So you have to really go as far as you can with sometimes lobbying records. Well, one time they said, we need to figure out who's behind this website that's bad-mouthing our company. And we think it's it's some charity, but we don't know who's behind this charity. And we think it's really our competitor. And I linked the charity and the competitor with a home address and also lobbying records. They both use the same lobbyist. And I said, what are the chances? And so you never know what you're going to find, but you have to keep going as long as you can with as many public records as you can get. And a lot of things aren't public, but a lot are. The thing in the United States that's the challenge is they could be anywhere. because there are 3,000 counties. They're kept at the county level, the city level. So, he might have been arrested for drunk driving, but it was in a state you never knew he went to while he was on vacation 12 years ago. And the databases miss it. And if you don't know about it, you might not go find it. So, you hope to be lucky and smart at the same time.
You're digging through all these records, looking for information on people. Are we invading their privacy when we do a project like this?
By definition, we aren't, because everything I'm looking at, I'm entitled to look at by law. So if you get divorced and you're in New York, and I pull your divorce filings, I see nothing except the fact that there's a filing. And I could maybe look at the docket, but I see no specifics. What you're alleging, what the other side is alleging, when the divorce is finished, what's the settlement agreement, I have no idea. I can't see that because New York's decided that's private. You're not allowed to see that. But if it's Maryland or Georgia, it's wide open. I could see, in Georgia once I saw that the big contested issue in this case was visitation rights for the dog. Who got to see the dog? They split having the dog. They didn't have any children, and the dog was like their child, and that was open because public policy has allowed us. So privacy is one of those concepts. In Scandinavian countries, people's tax returns are public. You can never see court case. They take out most criminal stuff off the system. They redact it even when it's there. It's purged. It's very hard to find any criminal records in a lot of Europe. But on the other hand, they don't think that what you make is really private. So that's their definition of privacy. Ours is different. And so, of course, I'm not getting anybody's tax returns without their consent. I'm not getting their bank account information without a court order or their consent. And that's the way we've defined it. So this is what I tell people. If you buy a house in your name and then you get a mortgage, well, that's public. That's the way we have it here. Public
Right.
registration. If you don't want me to know, what house you own, buy it in the name of Delaware Corporation that's not tied to you. But for goodness sakes, don't go live in it. Because if you go live in a house that's owned by some corporation, I'll suspect that's your corporation.
Right. So it's not invading privacy because what you do is based on these public records. And you mentioned again, bank records and tax records. And to be clear for our listeners, if you have a private investigator who is saying, I can get you bank records, I can get you tax records, they are doing something illegal to get those records. They may get them for you, but they are necessarily doing something illegal. And I know in some divorce cases, people will say, but we need those records. And I don't care that they're doing something illegal. They're doing it. I'm not. I'm fine. And I just don't buy that. I don't think that it's good to have any involvement whatsoever with that.
I agree. And, if a lawyer is hiring you to do this, the lawyer is responsible. The lawyer is your principal and has a duty under the ethical rules to supervise what you're doing. And the lawyer's not allowed to say, I don't know what they did. I just asked them for stuff and they got it. The courts will say, no, that's not good enough. You may not, and then they can exclude the evidence. You can be sanctioned or worse if you're a lawyer. It would be like, what if there's hey, let's wiretap. Let's put a bug in the house and find out what's going on. Let's stick a tracker on their car, which is now illegal in many states. If it's not your car, you're not allowed to do that. Let's hack into their, let's hack into their computer. Let's get someone in India to hack into their computer. And see that's all illegal. Just because you can do it doesn't mean you should do it.
Right. Okay, we could talk for hours on this, but as we wrap up, how do you know when an investigation is over?
Well, sadly, it can sometimes come down to budget. And what I generally say is I'm going to take a look at all these different sources that I tell you about, and I'm going to look at 3 or 4 or 5 counties where, some people have lived and worked in 40 counties over a long period, and you can't look at all those for budgetary reasons. It's too expensive. So what I do is I take a good whack at it, and if I have a fair budget, I can do that. And usually there are follow-up steps that you could say, for this period, here's what I've found, and if you get more information in discovery, if you want me to interview people in the next phase, I can do that. And you can find out a lot of good stuff about people by interviewing people they know, people they've worked with, hired, etc. We never do that in the first phase. We like to just do our homework and get the information first. But sometimes if there's budget, they want you to interview, although sometimes they don't want the other side to know that you're doing this investigation. And if you interview people, it would get back to them often. Even their enemies, it'll just get back to them. You always have to assume it will. So it's a good first phase public record. That's at least the first step. And then if there's more that comes out in discovery, sometimes they'll say, all right, well, we got this new batch of documents. What do you think of these? Is there anything you can tell us from this batch? And you go on and on. But for that, you need a more high value dispute. And not everybody has $200,000 to spend on lawyers and accountants and investigators,
Right.
because it's not, and they just want it to end. And so what I like to do is try and find some good questions to ask to get a better settlement, so that you don't have to go all the way to the very finish line and find every last dollar. You can just say, all right, we know about these 4 companies. What about the offer being this? And if it's something they can live with, that's sometimes the best outcome. Less stressful on the children. And so sometimes that's the best. And of course, it's up to the client to decide how much they want to fight for every last dollar. If they want to fight, okay, I'll help them fight. But many don't want to do that. They want to just get a fair settlement, know they got something they can be happy with, and move on.
So much great information today, Phil. Tell us again where to find you.
CharlesGriffinLLC.com. And we have a website with lots of information and 2 blogs, which we've been writing since 2009. There's lots to read, lots to hyperlink to. And people are always welcome to write in or call, and I'll try and talk for a short amount of time with them if they think they might want to hire us.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for being here with us today. Really educational. It's always great talking to you.
You too.